Hey everyone, Pugs here, and I'm back after my brief little hiatus to start reviewing Season 11 of SpongeBob SquarePants. Today I'll be covering two episodes, Cave Dwelling Sponge and the Clam Whisperer. Hard to believe yet another season has passed us by, and now we're starting fresh yet again. And with such an illustrious pair of episodes as this too, how lucky am I? Although I will say, one of these episodes I certainly recall much more than the other. I wonder which one you all think it is. Well, before I inevitably answer that question, let me be the first to say, as always, thank you to everyone checking out the video today. It's always super special when we're at these bookend videos, and especially after taking a break as well. I definitely needed it. And now, let's just get right into it. What's fun about Season 11 is that this is the season where we begin to hit episodes that I'm less familiar with. Of course, I've seen every episode of this season multiple times by now, but they haven't stuck with me the same way that episodes of earlier seasons have, just because of both their relative newness in comparison, and also because by the time this season began airing, I wasn't watching SpongeBob on the TV as much anymore and was mostly seeing episodes through a big binge once I got my hands on the complete season DVD, followed by sporadic reruns or DVD playings here and there. It's ironic that I'm saying all of this right now, though, given that Cave Dwelling Sponge is an episode that I can remember very well, so I suppose that's a kind transition for me. I wonder, how many of y'all watching think that this episode was inspired by the primitive sponge memes of, 2016? Which, wow, I can't believe that meme was 10 years ago. Anyway, since this episode premiered in September 2017, roughly a year after the meme became popular, I'm inclined to say that it potentially influenced the episode, but not by much. I mean, the first we heard of the episode's existence was in December 2016, but that doesn't mean that production wasn't happening on it much, much earlier. I think that a year is roughly how long it takes to make a SpongeBob episode anyway, so as I was saying, I think it's possible that the meme being popular influenced this episode, but I think that an episode with a prehistoric sponge was already in the books by the time the meme had emerged. I don't even think this show tends to follow trends in that way. To be fair, though, Primitive Sponge was one of the first big SpongeBob memes out there in our current, or at this point past, iteration of meme culture, so who knows? It's funny because I guarantee you if Primitive Sponge had been a popular meme a year ago and this episode released today, people would absolutely accuse this episode of jumping on the bandwagon thanks to episodes like My Leg or certain episodes of The Patrick Star Show, but that's another topic for another time. Let's get to the episode now. We begin with SpongeBob and Patrick enjoying, or, well, SpongeBob enjoying at least, a nature walk. I too love nature walks. I do them every weekend when I can, so I very much enjoy this. Though I rebuke SpongeBob's choice to walk barefoot, that is something I would probably never do. The two best friends stumble upon a cave with tons of ice in it, and of course, Patrick gets his tongue stuck on some ice. This part of the episode is pretty funny with Patrick freaking the hell out, and I love how after all that's done, he's all sheepishly like, I panic, SpongeBob. The delivery is just really good. SpongeBob uses hot chocolate to melt the ice enough to get Patrick's tongue free, and this, unbeknownst to him, also frees the prehistoric eponymous cave-dwelling sponge trapped inside. And captivated by the squeaking of SpongeBob's shoes, the cave sponge follows SpongeBob home. I kind of love how SpongeBob's normal walking sound is made a plot point for this episode. Having my attention called to the sound makes me realize just how many sound effects I tune out when watching. Well, tune out isn't the right word or phrase, since I know that if the sound effects were taken away, I'd notice. But perhaps not pay any mind to is the right phrase, like becoming nose blind to something just with hearing. SpongeBob is, of course, very oblivious to the cave sponge walking around his house. I love the little gizmo SpongeBob uses to get changed. That was a nice touch. The cave sponge also tries said gizmo, but it's not calibrated to someone with feet of his size, which means the cave sponge is deprived of the squeaky he so covets. And so the cave sponge follows SpongeBob to work. Even though I usually don't like obliviousness, I gotta say that SpongeBob's obliviousness here never teeters over to the edge of annoying, which I have to commend because that line can be crossed so quickly at times. Now, the people who are actually annoyingly oblivious are everyone else, considering that the cave sponge doesn't even look all that much like SpongeBob. Something, racism, something. Anyway. SpongeBob gets arrested for the actions of the cave sponge, and I love that Mr. Krabs immediately goes after him, and the scene between the two is pretty funny. Squidward is forced to stay at the Krusty Krab and cook, but he quickly comes across the cave sponge and somehow thinks he's SpongeBob, despite SpongeBob just having been hauled off to jail. Yeah, the critical thinking is simply not there for a lot of the characters in this episode, but that still doesn't annoy me nearly as much as it might seem. I just always jump on moments like these, even if they aren't truly irritating. Anyway, the cave sponge just goes off, and it's pretty fun to watch, with some funny jokes here and there, like the guy locking his boat door. I love how when Squidward barges into the kitchen to tell him that the patties are bad, he just loses it and starts attacking everyone with a club. Hilarious. Finally, people start realizing that the cave sponge isn't SpongeBob. Too bad that doesn't fix the problem of the cave sponge rampaging. Luckily, we've got SpongeBob the diplomat, who tries to connect with the cave sponge, who we're calling Spongy, Sponge the Sponge. And then we get a nice little dance number between the two. Now, that's the kind of random comedy I love to see. And when Spongy ends up destroying City Hall, turns out he did the right thing because it needed to be torn down anyway. And he finally gets his squeaky. All's well that ends well. I quite enjoyed Cave Dwelling Sponge. I thought it was a good opening to the season. Certainly not perfect, because while I did say that the obliviousness exhibited by everyone in this episode wasn't truly irritating, it did become somewhat grating at times, and so I've got to take points off for that. I also don't usually love plots relying on this kind of plot point anyway, regardless of how well the obliviousness is executed. But anyway, focusing back on the lots of good in this episode was really funny, and I just think it was a somewhat interesting idea, having Spongy here, and especially having SpongeBob's signature walking sound play such an important role in the plot. And so I think this episode is best placed in my great tier, where it comes in with a score of 8.5 out of 10. Alright, so remember how, like, 5 minutes ago, I was talking about how I don't remember some of the episodes of Season 11 very well? Yeah, so wouldn't you know it, we're already at the first one of those now with the Clam Whisperer. Like, I struggle to remember this episode. It definitely takes me a bit of time to get the facts sorted out in my head. They're there, just not easy to call upon. And that's largely because even after all this time, I still have only seen this episode probably a handful of times, just not one I see very often for whatever reason. The Clam Whisperer is about SpongeBob and, well, clams. Hopefully, given the title of this episode, nobody here is surprised by this. The beginning segment of this episode, with the clams migrating to warmer climates, with some neat visual gags in there, makes me wonder what direction this episode might take. Are we going rockabye bivalve, jellyfish jam, jellyfish hunter, housewarming, or something entirely different? I'm hoping it won't be housewarming at least, though I suppose should the episode go in that direction, this would provide this episode the opportunity to learn from the mistakes of that one. Anyway, as it turns out, this episode reminds me most of Sanctuary, with a side of Spongehenge and Jellyfish Hunter. The conversation between SpongeBob and Patrick at the beginning here literally makes me go wide-eyed. I don't know how else to describe it. Like, you know that gif of the guy blinking? Yeah, that's me when watching this scene, because Patrick just starts screaming for literally no reason, for a joke that is so bizarre to me and unnecessary. I don't dislike it or anything, it's just like, okay then. As the scene goes on, I realize something that isn't working for me here is that it all feels like padding? I don't know. I hate using terms like filler and padding because they're usually misused and used way too much, but here I think it fits, because the actual setup of the episode is being, like, delayed by these dragging moments, and of course this show is rarely ever plot driven, hence why I think filler is a term that is rarely accurately used here, but I think that this is one of those rare occasions that the term fits, or really padding fits, because filler is a very specific term that was meant for when anime was, like, going too far ahead of the manga that it was based on. But anyway, none of that is relevant right now. While I'm watching, it's just like, okay, I get it, as Patrick continues to be just kind of random as hell with his obliviousness and his denseness being very exaggerated. It's definitely a kind of writing for Patrick that leaves a lot to be desired. Finally, we get to looking at the clams. Lots of great visual gags here as we see all the different kinds of clams. SpongeBob wants to see the clams up close, so he lures them with food. Or, he tries to, but Patrick keeps eating it. And then Patrick falls asleep. I am again struck with the feeling that Patrick is completely unnecessary here, and I don't just mean for the plot. Considering he's not making me laugh, he's unnecessary for the comedy too. But whatever, once he falls asleep, he exits the episode. kind of. He's still a device even when sleeping. The clams crowd around Conch Street, which of course gets Squidward involved in things. It's fun to see him do a different art for once, theater in this case, and everything involving him in this scene is hilarious. SpongeBob goes to work, and the clams follow him in a scene that reminds me quite a bit of Jellyfish Jam. Very fun. The episode's title really comes into play here as the clams seem to follow his every move. Eventually, they all arrive at the Krusty Krab, and the clams immediately start stealing Krabby Patties. SpongeBob tries to enact control over them, but it doesn't work. I will say, this episode does a good job at making the clams fun to watch. I think the fact that there's so many of them and they move in sync just makes them visually interesting right off the bat, which can help a lot in making a character, or multiple of them in this case, though they are of course lumped into one general entity, fun to watch. It's something Housewarming somewhat failed to do, but that Sanctuary did well. The clams cause chaos at the Krusty Krab, and eventually Mr. Krabs gets involved, telling SpongeBob to get the clams out of the restaurant, at least until the clams start spitting pearls. This is where the jellyfish hunter parallels really come into play. Mr. Krabs purposefully aggravates them to get pearls, but unexpectedly, yet not unwelcomely, the episode does not spend any longer going in this direction as SpongeBob takes the clams out of the Krusty Krab. The clams then cause more chaos as SpongeBob walks downtown. Lots of funny jokes and gags here. SpongeBob and the clams are then confronted by an angry, injured mob. I must say, I loved the joke with the violinist. Very clever. SpongeBob leads the clams out of town, being quite the Clam Whisperer, and basically replicating Nature Pants, which was very surprising to me. SpongeBob's clam design is hilarious and I love it. After a whole season out in nature, the clams migrate away once more, so SpongeBob finally heads back home, and after Squidward had just gotten his house clean, he falls into a giant puddle of Patrick's spit as he was still sleeping. Squidward and Patrick then run off screaming hilariously, and SpongeBob goes to sleep in his giant nest. Good ending. The Clam Whisperer started off pretty weak, but once the actual plot of the episode got going, it was really fun. So in that way, this episode is kind of like a hidden gem, as the first few minutes set an expectation, at least for me, that this episode was not going to be very good. Or at least that the rest of this episode was not going to be very good, because let me be clear in saying that the first minute or two really wasn't great. And because of those less than stellar first couple minutes, I must refrain from putting this episode in my amazing tier, despite the rest of it being worthy of that honor. A high great seems good enough, and so I'll be putting this episode in that great tier with a score of 8.9 out of 10. As always, I'll be ending this video with some closing thoughts of mine. Hoo boy, it's good to be back. I won't lie, I considered extending my break further. It was nice to do, well, none of this, throughout the week, but that's mostly because my job saps away all my energy, so it feels good to do literally nothing. So that's not exactly a helpful metric at this point. And besides, I was getting antsy. I wanted to talk my SpongeBob, and so I knew it was time to get back to it. I worked out the schedule for the next few weeks, and it should be about 3 weeks of consistent uploads before I go on a small break again. That break will either be 1 or 2 weeks, depending, on how I feel, because I'll be going on a trip that'll be very, tiring, so I'm not sure if I'll be up to working on videos when I come back or not. Alrighty, well, that's about all from me today, so I'm gonna go ahead and end the video here, and I'll see y'all in the next review.